Welcome to Seymour from the Front Pew podcast, coming to you from the broadcast studio at Seymour First Baptist Church in Seymour, Tennessee, and featuring thoughts and discussions around loving God, loving others, making disciples, and living the life. I am your host, Tiger Brooks, and now, on to the podcast. Welcome into the Seymour from the Front Pew podcast. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. We are delighted that you have decided to focus in on what we're doing here, and we hope that we hope that we make it worth your welcome. And so today we've kicked a couple of guys out of the studio who are normally here. And we are going to have a little bit of a family focus on this broadcast. And so we brought in our kids ministry director, Miss Lyssa McHenry. Good to see you. How are you?
It's good to be here. Good.
And our student minister, Sean Trollinger, is back in the chair.
I'm here.
joining the family pastor, Jason, and myself for this broadcast. And so, Jason, I'm going to just kind of let you kind of introduce the topic today and kind of why we're going this direction. Kind of, obviously it relates to some things that are going on in the church and also some opportunities that you have in the larger community around us coming up. And so.
Yeah. So here at this, I guess when we're doing this podcast right now, it's this coming Sunday. But when you listen to this, it'll be the previous Sunday, but we've got just a special service that's going to be we're having. It's really going to be very family focused on multiple facets, and not necessarily. We didn't intend that necessarily from the outgo, but that's what God has orchestrated it to be, and so really going to be a very family focused service. We've got several baptisms that will be happening, including really almost an entire family minus one. Just a special story that kind of comes with them, their baptism and their salvation, and their coming to faith in Christ, and so through that, towards the end of the service, we're having our parent-child dedication, where we're dedicating. I have to look back at the list. I think it's up to 7 now. 7 kids that'll be baptized, that'll be dedicated. And so just exciting service that we're kind of looking forward to. But then also here in just about a week and a half, TKA is doing a parenting conference of such. And so I'm going and kind of sharing a few things there. And so a little bit of this is just discussion out of what we're going to talk about, what I'm going to talk about there. So you guys can help hone me a little bit before I go and make a fool of myself a little bit.
Iron sharpens iron.
That's right.
That's what we're here for. Before we get too far away from what you just described, why don't you take just a few seconds to kind of illuminate what family parent dedication means in our vernacular, as opposed to what they might find in other churches. Yeah.
So, one of the things we always say, and I meet with every family that is going to dedicate a child or children, meet with every one of them for multiple reasons. Number one is to first and foremost know that those parents are followers of Christ. If you're dedicating your children before the Lord, you need to have dedicated your life before the Lord. And so that's really the first step is knowing and being assured that those families, those parents have a relationship with the Lord. And it's really just kind of laying through and talking through with parents that we don't want to. Lots of churches do things different with parent-child dedication. I've seen them done different ways, and we don't. I'm not one of those that says that if you're doing it this way, you're doing it wrong. If it's not our way, it's whatever works for you in your context. But what we have found that works in our context, and I think for us is very intentional. It's not I really try and encourage all the families to say, it's not a show and tell time for your children, even though it's an exciting opportunity for our congregation, our church to see the children that are coming through. And it's funny is we've got 6 or 7 that are going to be dedicated this week. And I already know of 2 or 3 that are yet to come. And so they continue to come, which is obviously exactly what we want. But it's really a time for parents to stand before, number one, stand before the Lord and say, God, we are entrusting our children to you. And entrusting our children to you is also saying we are trusting and we are expecting you to do a work in their life. But we know that we are a tool. We're going to talk about this in a little bit. Mm-hmm. We are a tool that you, Lord, are going to use in the life of our children to bring about salvation in their life and to raise them to be children that are walking with the Lord through the rest of their life. And then on top of that, it's also parents standing before the Lord. And I've always felt very strongly about this, and maybe I don't voice it quite enough, but it's also parents standing before the congregation and saying, we want to raise our children in the ways of the Lord, and we can't do it by ourselves. Mm-hmm. And yes, we need the Lord's help first and foremost, but we need a community around us that is going to help support us, is going to encourage us whenever we hit the bumps in the road that inevitably are going to come. We are asking the church to come alongside of us and walk with us.
Accountability.
Yeah, accountability. So just a short little story. I remember whenever I was in school, I was probably in middle school into the high school years, and my parents were a part of a kind of a parenting group that would get together once a month or every so often, and the kids would go and we'd be there and hanging out at whatever house we were meeting at. Parents were down there doing a little discipleship, study or whatever, reading through scripture, praying with one another. What I didn't know is they're also down there talking to each other about the problems they're having with all of us kids and how they're working through different things. And I remember one day I went to the movie theaters. My town was not very big. It was bigger than Seymour. But we did have a movie theater, unlike Seymour. But we went to the movie theater and I wasn't doing anything wrong, but went in there, was hanging out with friends, whatnot, came back home, and there was a few friends that my parents didn't know were going to be coming, and they showed up and met with us. And so when I got to the house, Mom, immediately I walked in the door. So I understand so-and-so showed up. I was like, how did you know that? Like, were you there? Did you come and look? Said, nope. So, one of the parents from that group was at the theater dropping somebody else off, and they saw that and immediately contacted and said, just want you to know, so-and-so's here. And so I knew very quickly from a very early age that it was not just my parents' eyes.
There's eyes everywhere.
That I was watching for. There were a lot of eyes on me, and that helped keep me accountable, just to be honest. And so... that's another aspect of our parent-child dedication that I think is very important is really saying to the congregation as a whole, this is not just their task, it's our task.
Yeah.
To raise our children in the ways of the Lord.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So to the topic du jour, what are we gonna get into today? We're gonna cut it up.
Yeah. So really wanting to, I'll just throw this resource out here. This is a book by Paul David Tripp. It's parenting. It's called 14 Gospel Principles. So really the idea for us to really just kind of discuss is this idea of, as parents, are we owners or are we ambassadors of our children? And so pose that question to all of us. I've been wrestling with this question for several weeks, almost a month or two now. And just thinking through that concept of ownership or ambassadors. And let me read a first scripture to you in Psalms chapter 127, starting in verse 3. It says, "Sons are indeed a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the sons born in one's youth." And so just thinking about this idea, we are around this table. We have very, very somewhat new parent to not so new parent in Tiger.
Yeah.
And so just thinking about that, and what are y'all's thoughts on the idea of being an owner of our children, being an ambassador of our children? What does it mean?
Why don't you, for the sake of those who are listening, that just define owner, ambassador, as it is in the context that we're using it today?
Yeah. So owner, I would think means they are mine.
Mm-hmm.
These kids are mine. And the hard part is we really start to flesh this out. How I act with my kids and the way that I parent my kids is directly going to be linked by how I view myself. Do I view myself as their owners, or do I view myself as an ambassador? And owner is that they're mine. It's fully in my wheelhouse. It's whatever that looks like. To me, ambassador, and I'm kind of giving this away, I believe we are ambassadors, not owners of our children. Ambassador is I have been entrusted by the owner.
So ambassador and steward are they're same thing. Okay.
Yep. I would say so. Yeah. But this idea, I've been entrusted by the owner of my children to do the tasks and to do the things that I've been called to do. So is there an element of ownership there to a degree? Yes, I need to take ownership that I am their ambassador. So there's a little bit of a nuance there. But, but thinking about it from that perspective and how does that play out? What do you think that plays out in terms of the way we raise our children, rather than just they're mine, I want them to do what I want them to do?
Yeah. Who wants to weigh in first?
I will.
Okay.
So I feel like at one time in my life, as a new parent to an infant, I had that ownership mentality, and it was stressful. I had a lot of anxiety, and I feel like I was really responsible for everything for my child, not just their well-being physically, but just like, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? And it's just things that you can't control. It's just anxieties and worries. And I feel like God really woke me up one day and was like, hey, this is my kid. You need to step back and just pray and do your best. And so I've tried to live by that. And so to me, when you're talking about being an owner of your child, to me, that represents a lot of anxiety and stress. And I don't need that. Yeah. We don't need that. It's not healthy.
Sure. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, I would, for me, the difference between the ownership and the stewardship is the kind of way I look at it. As ownership, I feel like it's less leading, it's more controlling, and the stewardship is leading your child. Yeah. And, I'm on the different side of it with being with students is, for kids, they still need that kind of protection and being cared for because they can't do it themselves. Students are getting to a maturity where they can care for themselves to a point. And so what I've seen is the parents who own their children, who I would go as far as say control their children. A lot of times when they get out of the student ministry, they're the ones that have the collapse because they were never led to what it looks like to be a spiritual individual, to be a follower of Christ, to live a Christian life. They were controlled to do those things. So it was never instilled in them. It was forced upon them. And so a lot of times the parents who try to possess their child is the ones later in life they have the hardest time because they never learned it. They were forced upon them. But the kids who were led, like, let me teach you how to live a Christian life, those are the ones who I typically see have a greater outcome later in life because it was taught to them. They learned how to be a believer. They learned how to walk that way. It wasn't forced onto them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say that, in kind of just fleshing that out in my thoughts as y'all have been talking, I think that when you look at the motivations for the reasons that we want our kids to obey, for the reasons that we want our kids to do the things that we ask them to do, and and have expectations that they're going to behave in a certain manner. The nuance difference here is when you behave in a way that you are an owner parent and basically your answer to everything is because I said so.
Yeah.
I think that creates a building animosity over time that will eventually play itself out some way. But if we have the capacity, and this is hard because all of us fall into the rut of just having that attitude sometimes, especially if we lose our emotions, that kind of thing. But if we have the capacity, and I think for young parents, I think to establish these ways of behaving now, it's going to go well for you, is to be able to tell your kid, you've been entrusted to me by God. Mm-hmm. He has said, this is the way you should go. I am to raise you in the fear and admonition of the Lord. And it says here, you should honor your father and mother. Mm-hmm. I didn't make the rule, but God did. Yeah. And so I'm going to help you understand his expectations for you. And I'm going to do everything I can to help you be raised the way that he would want you to be raised, which is spelled out in his word. And I think when you are able to reason with a kid and tell them, this is why do you need to do this? Because this, mm-hmm. because God said this, and because this is what's best for you. This is a protection for you. This is whatever the situation holds. I think that goes a long way to when that child gets into their teens and they can understand these things and they hit that wall of, your mom and dad don't know anything and I'm going to rebel and everybody kind of goes through that to some extent. I think it smooths that over when you haven't spent a lifetime just saying, because I said so, and go to your room, that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that you don't discipline your kid or right. Don't do a thing, but it's all in the reason why. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one way that stewardship or ambassadorship plays out in a more healthy way than ownership, tight-fisted, mm-hmm. because I said so, you're mine kind of deal.
Yeah, and I think that plays out a little bit in the sense that it's almost this long-term parenting versus short-term parenting. Mm-hmm. That I'm just a confession time here. Most people know I have 4 children, and they're all boys all the time. Yeah, and
very boys.
It is very, very easy for me to fall into the rut of, and I've caught myself doing this, and there's times I've done this, and I have to go back and confess it, and this was wrong. I shouldn't have done this, but there's times that I just want my boys to listen, not because God says so in that moment. In the moment, it's just, I want you to listen because I want you to listen because this is what's best for me. Mm-hmm. Like, I need you to be quiet. I need you to, whatever the story is. And most of the time, I would say that probably comes out in restaurants whenever they can't sit still. And I'm like, oh my gosh, the entire restaurant is looking at us like hooligans. And I'm like, I just want you to sit down and be quiet for the moment. And but in the long span of it, if you look at it, that's more this is for me. I want that's almost me parenting for myself. Like, I want you to do this because it's what's best for me in this moment, rather than taking the long approach. And I'm not saying it's easier. In fact, I think this approach is harder. It's taking the long approach of trying to help them understand, and that it's not because we want the restaurant to look at us. Number one, that shouldn't be my concern anyway. That the restaurant who cares what the restaurant looks at us? It's more of what is being instilled in my children for the long term? What is happening? What am I trying to help them to see and understand that is going to bring about biblical understanding and an understanding of who God is and who they are in the Lord and what all of that looks like. And I know I've even done it to myself, and a lot of parents are like, when I'm in the moment, I'm not thinking about any of that.
Yeah.
Oh, I get it. I mean, that is the natural default for us as parents. And I think that is the hard part is helping us to see, as an ambassador, I think about this idea as an ambassador. Most ambassadors, do they have authority? Yes, they've been given authority, but the authority that comes to them that they hold is not their own. It is authority that is given to them by someone who has authority over them. Mm-hmm. And I think the same is true for us as parents, that we do have authority and we should exercise that authority over our children through discipline, through correction. And we want you to, here's, rules and boundaries. Like, that is our purpose. We should be doing that. And I would argue that if we are not doing that, That's sin, because that is a task that's been given to us by God. But if you look at it from this perspective, my authority is given by somebody else. It's not my rules, my standards, the things that I'm putting in place before my children. They are given to me by the Lord, and it is instruction to raise them for His purposes, not for my purposes.
Yeah.
And God's purposes is not for them to be quiet in the moment that I just want them to be quiet. That's not what it is.
Right.
And so that's kind of playing off of what your point is there. I think that's kind of looking at it from that perspective a little bit.
Yeah. And I think I would just add to that, if you are a parent, you're listening to this and you feel immediate guilt for some of whatever you've done recently or in the past, forgiveness. There's grace. The grace abounds, right? And so,
welcome to the club.
Yeah,
we all
have been there. And I would say this is that in those moments, like when you're in that restaurant, you don't have time to have a deep theological discussion on, why this child needs to behave because it's the will of God for their life. In that moment, you may have to just say, you just need to be quiet, but you can go back when cooler heads are prevailing and sit down with that child. And this is something I want to challenge parents too. You need to understand that your child can understand a lot more than you think they can understand. You can sit down with your child, even at a young age, and say, God put me in this position. You are His child under my care for this period of time. And this is why I say these things. They will remember that. You can ask Ellie about some things that we've had conversations about over the years, and she will remember and understand, some of the things that we've discussed. But there are times when you just can't do that in the moment. Like for instance, in my ministry, I did what you guys did for a number of years before I went. God called me into different other kinds of ministries. So I had children and youth that I was responsible for years. And I've treated myself as I was a steward of those kids just as much as I was a steward of my kid when they were in my care, and I would take a bullet for them. I would lay down my life for them just like I would lay down my life for my own kid. And I remember specifically taking a group of kids to our local mall one time, back when our mall was still a mall in Kingsport. And we were going back to the van, and we were walking through the parking lot, and the kids were just being kids. And we got to this crossover, and one just jumped out and started crossing the road, and there was a car coming at a high rate of speed. I didn't have time to yell. I didn't have time to say, hey, would you mind, getting behind and waiting and looking both ways. I didn't have time. I reached out and grabbed him and picked him up and pulled him literally back onto the curb. And he looked at me like wide-eyed because he had no idea what was about to happen. The car goes by, and everybody was like, oh, man. And so, that's a moment I had to get you back because I had to get you back. Didn't have time to explain it, but you can go back and explain that later. And that's kind of a crazy example, but nonetheless, you can always go back and help your kids understand why it is that we do the things that we do, we say the things that we say, and we hold you to a standard that we're not going to compromise on. So anyway.
Have you ever been wrong?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
So one thing I struggle with is
3-4 times.
I'm glad it's not much. One thing I've struggled with, and I think it probably relates to more of an ownership style of parenting, is apologizing to my kids. And I think it's really important that we do that when we're wrong, because it lets them say, hey, mom, dad is not perfect. And they mess up like me. But there's forgiveness in that. Like, I can forgive my parent. I can forgive the child like Jesus forgave us. But personally, that's something I struggle with because I don't want to be wrong. I don't want my kids to come back, well, mom, you were wrong this time. And so I that's something I struggle with. But I want to be more of a stewardship type parent who says, there's forgiveness here even when we mess up.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Well, and it's even looking, helping your kids to see, mom and dad are not perfect, but God is.
yeah,
Like he is the one that's perfect.
Exactly.
But we're messing up.
yeah,
Mom and dad have to ask forgiveness before the Lord on a daily basis, just like you're going to have to ask forgiveness. It's instilling that and modeling that idea of forgiveness. Absolutely. I think that's good.
yeah.
Yeah. One other thing that, kind of just pointing back to this scripture, I am fully aware that this is a part that ruffles some feathers of parents. So I acknowledge it. I apologize, but I don't apologize.
Yeah.
That you look at this verse and
You didn't write it.
No, I didn't. That's exactly right. I've had numerous conversations with parents that have struggled through this concept. In verse 4, it says, like arrows in the hands of a warrior are the sons born in one's youth. And there's this sense that, what do you do with an arrow? An arrow is not made to stay in the quiver.
Mm-hmm.
An arrow is made, it goes in the quiver, and when it is time to be used appropriately in the right way, it is shot out. I think when we think of our kids in an ownership mentality, we want to keep them in the quiver.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to let them out of the quiver. We want to leave them there. And listen, I get it. I've been there. I've done that. I've held 4 of them the day of their birth in those hospitals and thought, I'm never letting them go. I want to do everything I can to protect them, watch over them. And then they grow up to be 8 and 9-year-olds. And I'm like, when can I get them out of the house kind of thing? But
That's where I was going with that thought.
But I think there is this sense that, and I understand this, again, different perspectives. Sean, she's still 1. She's still very much in the quiver.
Mm-hmm.
Yours is basically out.
Listen,
Tiger.
my arrow is in the bow, and the string is being pulled very tautly at this particular moment.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, our goal as in this imagery, we are warriors,
Mm-hmm.
and the warrior is to send that arrow down range so that it hits its mark.
Yeah.
Whatever that mark may be.
Right.
And all we can do is train,
Mm-hmm.
help them understand and figure out what that mark is going to be,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and do the best we can to aim them in the right direction as we send them out. And so, I mean, I literally as we record this, I'm a month and a half away from that happening.
Yep.
And so I'm very keenly aware of the responsibility has now come full circle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like I'm going to stop being her father.
Correct. Yep.
We're going to still have a relationship, and it hopefully will last the rest of my lifetime on earth. Well, it's going to last a lot longer than that because we got eternity together. But nonetheless, everything now is, did I say and do the right things? Did I, is she ready to go out here? Is she ready to be a wife?
Mm-hmm.
Is she ready to be eventually, hopefully not too soon, but a mother? Have I done what I have been called to do by God?
Yeah.
And so, when you get to that point, for all of you who have your little bitty baby and you're wanting to make sure that you get the things right, it's a healthy thing to ask those questions.
Yep.
It's a healthy thing to, you need to know what your responsibilities are, and you need to be about doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's a great question to ask.
Yeah, and I'll add into that. I have had numerous parents in student ministry who are so fearful of the world that they want to protect, which protecting your child is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember one specifically, not here, but at my previous church. This mom, she wouldn't send her kid to camp. She wouldn't send her kid on any trips or overnight things that we would do. And I finally asked her, what's going on? And she said, well, when I was in student ministry, I was exposed to things and this stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And finally I said to her, I understand you want to protect your child, but here's the reality. They're going to be exposed to it.
Mm-hmm.
Is it better for them to be exposed to it when they're in your home and you can give guidance through that, or they get exposed to it when they're out of your home and they've never had guidance to it?
Yep.
and helping parents understand, like, yes, the world is a scary place, but the reality is your kid's not going to live in your house forever. They're not going to be tucked under mom and dad's wings forever. Is it better for them to experience some of this stuff while you can be there to love and care and guide them, or them to experience it while they're on their own and they don't know what to do with it?
Right.
And so it's a hard one. I'm not there yet. We don't have to face that. We're just making sure Hillel stays alive. But that is one thing I've seen a lot in student ministry, is this fear which or creates this overprotection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the world that we all have to live in, and it's not getting any easier. The Bible tells us it's not going to get any easier, and all we can do is to guide them through it, help them understand what this is, why is it this way, how can we process this in a way that is biblically correct.
Yeah.
And again, it's one of those things, we don't always get it right. It's not like you are not advocating, hey, we all got to take our kids out to the bar and, show them things. But trust me, it's there. They will be exposed one way or the other. All of our student ministries are full of sin, just like every other aspect of our world that we live in. And all you can do is help them understand what it is they're seeing and why they're seeing it, and how can I live through this and still honor God in the way that I carry myself.
Yeah. Hard question, sort of. And I'm going to kind of pose it in two different ways. One to you, Sean. Hillel's only a year old. How does it make you feel about knowing the prospect that there's going to come a day where you're going to be in Tiger's seat and it's time to send that arrow down range? How does that make you feel as a parent of a 1-year-old?
It definitely scares me. Mm-hmm. And I've told Cameron many a times that Hillel can start to date when she's like 35. But no, something Cameron has said to me and helped me realize is that for me as a dad of a daughter, is I'm going to get to be the one that sets the example of who she should be with.
Yeah.
Through my leadership in her life, through sharing the love of God with her, I will be the example of the one, hopefully, she chooses to be her husband. And that's a heavy burden.
Yeah.
And a scary thing to think about. But it's also reassuring is that, I'll hopefully get to be a part of that process of when she gets there, when she's 40 and decides who she marries. No, I'm just joking. But yeah, no, it's a scary thing, but then also a exciting thing too.
Yeah.
Well, here's the big question though. What are you going to do when she brings somebody in that's 6 feet tall or taller?
It's got 2 feet on you.
He's going to let the shotgun talk.
Yeah. So I've told students and Cameron of whenever this day comes, when she brings a boy or boy comes to pick her up, there will be an animal in the driveway
being skinned,
being gutted, and I will make sure he knows your fate can be the same if you are not careful.
That's good. I kind of asked the same question for you, Lyssa. Ren's 4th grade now.
Yeah.
And so you've still got Oliver, who is 5. So you're still very much young kids. Yeah. But as a mother, we're dads. I do think dads look at that a little bit different than moms do.
Yeah.
So for you as a mom, how do you view that? What is your view of looking and thinking about the prospect of sending those arrows downrange at some point?
So I hope I don't cry. Gosh, this is hard. So I feel like I've already had to have that look as a foster adoptive mom.
Yeah.
Because you got these little kids in your house, and you don't know God's plan for them yet. They're just 2 and a newborn. And I had the same conversation with God again that I had when Ren was an infant. Lord, these are your children. I'm just trying to take care of them the best that I can.
Yeah.
And I know that you're going to take care of them better than I can, no matter where they are living or who is tucking them in at night. So in a way, I feel like God's already started preparing me for that. And, I guess it was his will that they stayed with us and they were adopted. So we didn't have to actually look at that in reality. But I think that God has just taken a lot of steps to prepare my heart for those days that actually are going to come, and my children are going to go in the world. And I laugh because my children are so stubborn, and I guess a lot of people could say that. But sometimes I'm like, Lord, I don't know why you made them so stubborn. But I trust that you're going to use that for your glory one day. And so I feel like, just to sum that all up, it's just something God is already working in me, and I'm going to trust him even though it's hard.
Yeah.
And I might have to get a shotgunner out one day. But, ultimately, I just hope that when that time comes, I can look at God and say, okay, they're your kids.
Yeah.
Let me just be here as a parent, supporting them, and while they're, that you're working through them.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of excited to see where God sends them and what they do, even though they're only 5, 8, and 9. It's kind of exciting too to think about, okay, how's God going to use them in this world?
That's good. I mean, she raises a really valid point there when you think about the approach that a foster parent or someone who's fostering to adopt, whatever it is, the attitude that they have toward their child is the same attitude. Even though that child we know is not the fruit of their loins, so to speak, but they have been entrusted with this child. But the aspect that we're talking about is just the same.
Yep, it
because they are all God's children.
Yep.
And we are entrusted with their care for a period of time. And so it's just even heightened in the life of those who have chosen to foster. And that's
ironically
very cool thing.
One of, I think, the main reasons why people don't want to foster is because they don't want that attachment and they don't want that loss.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we need that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a hard thing to experience, but I think there's a lot of growth to be had through the Lord when you go through those experiences.
Yeah, it is a real test. I kind of asked that question, at least to both of you, and mostly because I want everyone to understand that as we're talking about this concept of ownership versus ambassadors, and looking at the idea, and when I tell parents and we tell parents, hey, we are raising our children for the purpose of sending them out, ultimately to instill in them that God has a purpose for you that is outside of my will, outside of my home, and beyond me, that God has a purpose for you, and it's my task to help get you there along the way through the help of the Lord. But I wanted others to hear that heart from us, because I never say that tongue in cheek saying, oh, it's easy, suck it up. It's hard for all of us, for our own families, our own children. We know, we get, and we understand that there's times I want to tuck them in bed and say, you're never going to get out of here, because I don't want you to see, what's out there and face the harms and the hardships, and my child coming home from school crying because he's been bullied or someone didn't like him, or, something has happened. It's that protective nature that comes in. Absolutely, we should have that. But I think we also need to realize, and I think, Lyssa, like you said, celebrate and be excited that God has a plan for our children that is beyond us. Because that is so much, because that is so much better than his plans for my children are so much better than anything that I could ever dream and that I could ever hope for my kids. And so that's what I want us to kind of help to understand and to recognize, this idea of if I'm their owner, bless them. Yeah. They've only got there's only so far they can go. Yeah. But the fact that I'm only an ambassador for the sake of a holy God that has so much more in store for them, that's something to celebrate and something to be excited about. Not something to think, oh, well, that's a bummer, that's a downer. No, that's a great thing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But the thing I love about our team, our staff here, is I feel like that's our calling, is to walk with our families as they're going through the joys of parenting, the hardships of parenting. I mean, I feel like that's my calling. Yeah. To say, yeah, I hear you. that's a really hard situation.
Yeah.
And how can we pray for you? And how can we encourage you through that? And I'm just thankful that God put me in this position to be in that space with parents.
Yeah.
Amen.
I think all of us are.
Yep.
All right. And with that, we'll put a period at the end of this broadcast. We thank you, as always, for tuning in. If something you heard today piqued your interest, you can always reach out to us. You're about to hear an email where you can reach out to us. You can grab any of us that you want that on a Sunday or something. If something comes down the pike, you want to ask us a question, we're here to help, and we're delighted to do that. But as always, thank you for listening, and like, share, all this, post, repost, whatever, tweet. I don't know, do you tweet anymore, or do you X?
I never did any.
Yeah. Anyway, I do, and I don't even know what to call it. All right, everybody say bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Seymour from the Front Pew. Our sole desire for this podcast is to glorify God by educating and encouraging His body. If you would like to learn more about anything you've heard today, feel free to reach out by email at staff@seymourfbc.org or by visiting our website at seymourfbc.org. If you're located near our community and do not have a church home, come worship with us at 10:15 a.m. on Sunday morning. Until then, we pray God's richest blessings on you and yours as you love God, love others, make disciples, and live the life.